Configure vNetwork distributed switches and VSS policies. All right, so we're starting to move into the optional portions of this series, and I think from here on what we've got are some of the really interesting topics that are not necessarily core to the operations of your vCenter environment, but they are nice add-ons. We're going to talk about distributed switches, the storage appliance, fault tolerance, just a lot of these other things that the test requires you to know because it's VMware technology. They want you to be aware of it. But in many cases, these are going to be the kinds of additional sort of functionalities that you may probably want to implement at some point in time to solve certain business problems. In the case of vNetwork distributed switches and the policies that you assign to them, this technology was brought into play in order to solve a kind of a singular problem with the original standard switch architecture. Right, with standard switches, I've mentioned before, when you create a standard switch, you create that, it's very host-centric. Right? The switch configuration you create for ESX1 does not automatically propagate to ESX2, and so on and so forth. And so consequently, if you got 2 or 3 hosts, it's not a big deal. Right? You create your switches and you're done. But if you got 20 or 30 hosts, or multiple clusters, all of which have 20 or 30 hosts, you can see how these distributed switches start to get a little bit more, or these standard switches start to get a little bit more complex. You have to make sure that those settings are exactly correct across all the switches. And in fact, even vMotion, I believe, looks at the switch name between the different hosts to ensure where it can move virtual machines to. So it's got the right port groups as it moves them around. So just a couple of, minor mistakes in your switch naming, and you can very quickly find yourself on a really bad day. So back in version 4, VMware actually created this whole notion of a distributed switch. Now, the difference between a distributed switch is that the virtual switch in this case is actually placed on the data center instead of on the individual host. And so being on the data center and having a logical connection to the individual hosts and the switches there allows the data center to manage the connections between all the different hosts. So it's like, I don't know, think of it like Windows group policy, right? You're creating a virtual switch policy, more or less, that deploys out to all of the hosts. Just like in the Windows group policy, you create a policy that deploys out to all of your servers. Now, you can almost argue that this whole distributed switch functionality, and we'll talk about that when we get down here to the click-by-click portion, this distributed switch functionality is kind of one of the directions in which VMware is moving as it relates to its product set. You know, a lot of the new functionality from out of VMware, the vShield product, the vCloud product, all that stuff really requires this sort of logical construct that's associated with the switches. And also some of the monitoring pieces, network statistics, network I/O control is another one. All of these sort of monitoring functionalities are ones that need to tag onto a vNetwork distributed switch, because from that location, in that single policy-driven switch that then talks to all of the hosts, only there can you be guaranteed that you're going to be able to see whatever virtual machine